afternoon, and good evening to everyone who's joining today. Thank you for participating in this event. My name is Dr. Ali Fenwick, and as Stephen already mentioned, I'm a professor of organizational behavior and also innovation at Hult International Business School. So what am I going to be talking to you about today? Today I want to talk to you about the power of connection and why being socially connected is so important during this pandemic. I really want to share with you some of my thoughts on how the global pandemic is creating more distance, actually, and less connection, and why this is so damaging to our society. The title of my presentation today, as you can see from the screen, is Physically Distant but Socially Connected. And the reasons why I chose this title is because keeping physical distance is important to prevent the further spread of the virus, but being mentally and physically and emotionally connected is what will keep us happier, safer, and of course, much more healthier. So that's kind of the theme and the direction that I'd love to take my presentation today with you. But before I get into this a little bit more deeper, let me provide you a little bit more of an introduction of myself, and then we'll move on. So I teach various topics at Hult, and one of the topics the themes that I teach is around organizational behavior. How do we create results through people? How do we strengthen your abilities mentally as well as physically? And so different courses that I teach at Hult will be anything around organizational behavior, will be management psychology, behavioral economics. Probably if you heard of these kind of topics before, those are the themes that I mainly focus on. I also focus on innovation. And there's also one thing that I do as well in the program is that I teach a capstone project called the Hult Business Challenge or Future Mindset Challenge. And that is basically instead of writing a thesis at Hult, you do a 3-month or 2 to 3 month capstone project where you work with a team to work on a real life, either consulting or a future kind of technology-based concept that you will work on for 2 or 3 months, and that will basically be your capstone project. And I facilitate that mainly for the Dubai campus. So that's a little bit what I teach. As a profession, I'm an industrial organizational psychologist. So I specialize in cognitive psychology and also in talent management. So I help all kinds of organizations from institutions to schools, businesses, but also sport teams and also the military to help apply psychological intervention and behavioral concepts to identify, first of all, candidates that would be very suitable to positions, but also at the same time to see how we can use psychological intervention to increase mental as well as physical performance. So that's something that I do as well, and something that I really love because I care about people's performances and how we can improve that even further. I run one of the first behavioral companies, or one of the first consultancy firms specialized in behavioral science, applied behavioral science, and we run a center called the Center for Applied Behavioral Science and Technology, TCM&L, the company name is. And we've been around for almost 10 years now, and we work for all kinds of organizations and institutions to help them to basically apply psychology and behavioral science back into the workplace, and to come up with all kinds of interventions that can help them to improve performance or even to boost mental well-being and health of employees in the organization. And the final thing that I'd like to share with you is also I'd like to share something personal with you. Besides my professional persona, I myself am half English and I'm half Spanish, and I was born in the Netherlands. I'm right now in the Netherlands at this moment. Fairly diverse, I would say, in that sense. If you looked at my name, it seems very Arabic, but I'm not Arabic at all. There's a beautiful love story between my parents on on my name. My full name is actually Musa Ali Fenwick, very Arabic in that sense, but I myself have no background there. But there's a beautiful story. So hopefully one day we ever get to meet each other, I'll be able to tell you more about that story between my parents. It's a beautiful story, by the way. Another thing here is I really love sushi. I love to share that with people. I really am so addicted to it. And that's something that I like to tell people. It's just something very big for me. So just let me know in the chat if you like sushi as well. Then I think I've made some new virtual friends here, and we can have some virtual sushi sometimes. So yes, from that perspective, that's one more thing. And the last thing, I'm fairly fluent in Japanese. I used to live in Japan I worked for a Japanese company for many years, and my bachelor's was in Japanese translation and interpretation. So that's something a little bit about me on a personal level. But let's get back to today's presentation. So I think, you know, in the recent months, or in the last, I would say in the last year, as a behavioral scientist, I've been really at the forefront of this pandemic, studying human behavior, just not only from not only just to provide, let's say, a behavioral perspective to the various phenomena we have witnessed around the world, but also to provide direction on how to deal with the ongoing uncertainty that still awaits us. Now, I speak regularly on different TV channels about what's happening in the pandemic, how is it affecting people, and providing mainly insights and strategies on how to deal effectively with this pandemic and its impact on society. We see a lot of, let's say, doctors and epidemiologists on, let's say, TV, but I'm thinking we're starting to see more behavioral scientists as well, because I think we need to know from a behavioral perspective what's the impact and how best to deal with this. And that's one of my roles as well in the last months, to provide that perspective as well. So let's get started into terms of talking about the coronavirus. Now, I think we're living in very challenging times, very unsettling times. Let's say that as well. And last year, just in a matter of a couple of months, our lives turned upside down. A novel virus, better known as COVID-19, I think we all know the name now, has infected but also killed millions of people across the way in this past year. Now, I think what the coronavirus has done is basically it's caused for a lot of uncertainty in this world, and uncertainty in terms of when will this end, what's going to happen, if you get infected, how sick will you become? And I think this is creating a lot of anxiety with a lot of people, and we're seeing how the effects of this uncertainty is affecting people over time. But in times of uncertainty, we also look up to our leaders, let's say, and our government to find answers how best to deal with a situation like this. And unfortunately, it's not always possible for our leaders to provide a good answer, because a lot of our leaders don't sometimes know what the best answer is. And I think this is a major concern to a lot of people, because this also results to an amounting uncertainty, which affects people in various ways, but also has been very interesting in terms of behavioral phenomena that we've seen across the world in the last couple of months. Now, I want to start with this concept of social distancing, right? So you all know by now what it means. You've heard the term before, but this term social distancing, I dislike, and I believe it's a wrong choice of words. And I'm going to explain to you why. I think we humans are social by nature, and telling us not to socialize really goes against our core need to connect. And connecting and interacting, is with our family ties or social ties, such as our families, our friends, and yes, even our social media connections to that extent, is not only for fun. We derive a lot of meaning and even identity and even a sense of security from the social groups that we engage with. So in other words, there's a psychological need to connect with other people to help us understand who we are and where we belong. And for, even for some, the affiliation to the group can be so strong that the moment that they are not together with other people, they can feel extremely anxious and also at the same time feel extremely disconnected. Now, what I think is really important to know is that group values and beliefs can affect individual behavior so strongly that some people, can go along with what the group wants, even when the individual might initially not want to. And therefore, it's not surprising that many people don't adhere to social distancing measures. Now, there's another reason why I think the term social distancing is not the most appropriate definition to use here. Initially last year when the pandemic started, a lot of people associated social distancing with not going to work and not going to school, right? That was the initial reaction to that. So what do we do when we don't go to school and we don't go to work? it's playtime, right? Surely social distancing, when we're at home doesn't really mean that we can't go out and see our friends. So I believe that this terminology had caused and is still causing a lot of misunderstanding in terms of what we really need to do here if we really want to fight off a virus. So I actually suggest that we start using a more effective term. So instead of social distancing, I would love to suggest, and I've been doing this for over a year now, to propose the term physical distancing. Why? Because with physical distancing, we understand that it has to do with the physical proximity that we need to take from each other without compromising our fundamental need to connect. Okay, some other phenomena that I'd like to talk about that I've also spoken a lot about, and you all probably very much know about. So besides social distancing, I think the pandemic has also brought about some interesting behavioral phenomena that we've seen around the world. And I remember last year when the shelter in place, the lockdown measures were put into effect, how quickly people went to supermarkets to start panic buying or bulk buying in that perspective, really believing that non-essential and also essential food products would not be in stock anymore. Now, of course, we all remember the notorious toilet paper and how people would run to the supermarkets for to buy toilet papers like their lives depended on it. And so, I mean, to go into the reasons why people buy toilet paper, I can tell you about that, but unfortunately, it just goes beyond the scope of today's session. But what I do want to say is that when we deal with an uncertain and also very threatening situation, our brains go into survival mode and we tend to act very irrational. And when we don't know what to do, we tend to follow other people, especially other people like us. So when we see other people panicking or going out and buying toilet paper, and especially people who are similar to us, we start to do the same. So what's very interesting here is that even our irrationalities, to some extent, have a social component to them as well. Another thing that hasn't passed our minds in that perspective, or that we've also become very aware of in the recent months, is that the concept of working from home. Now, working from home has really become, part of today's new era, right? It's the new norm in working in today's changing nature of work. But what's very interesting here to know is not, I think we also need to be very mindful, besides companies like Hitachi and Twitter and Fujitsu, who have made remote working a permanent option for employees. It's great to see that these kind of companies are going with the times and changing as change happens. But we also need to be very mindful of the fact that many people, even in industrialized countries like Germany or the US, or even Japan for that matter of fact, a lot of people can't work from home. Approximately, I would say 60 to 70% of employers in countries like Germany and the US and also in Japan can't facilitate working from home setups. So this actually means that it's not so much to do with the economy, it has more to do with the fact that the nature of the job. So say, for example, think of businesses like hotels, hospitals, restaurants, construction workers, and factories. These are people that need to be on the ground. But now let's go a step further. What about people who live in developing countries like India, countries in Africa, for example, or maybe even in Brazil for that matter of fact, where a lot of people don't have the basic resources in place to be able to work online, who are living below the poverty line. Often they get forgotten in this pandemic, and they are also ones that are really being hit the hardest because of what's happening with the current situation. So also, I think it's really important to be mindful of people who are not able to work from home, because often we talk about working from home as a thing that's naturally there for us, but unfortunately that's not true. Another thing that we've also seen during the pandemic, and this is very much also on the rise, that being cooped up at home has put a lot of pressure on people, especially on marriages, relationships, and on families. And divorce rates have gone off the roof. But besides divorce rates, we've also seen a huge increase around the world in terms of domestic violence. And just imagine if you live in countries like Hong Kong or Japan, where the average house size is around 45 square meters, and living within such a small space with a family can be very, very challenging, even for the best of people. Now, another very unintended consequence of the, let's say, the pandemic has been also the rise of mental health issues. Now, cases of anxiety and depression have increased significantly during the pandemic. And also, I'd say working from home and living alone for long periods of times can really have negative effects to people's well-being, their cognitive performance, their emotional state, and even lower your immune response. And these are all very important properties that we need to have if we want to fight off a possible infection of COVID-19. So that's something that we also need to be mindful of. Now, the last thing that I actually want to share with you in terms of the impact that this pandemic has had is the rising, let's say, social unrest that we've seen happening around the world, polarization, and of course the social divide due to political, racial, even economical tensions. Now, the uncertainty and fear that the coronavirus has sparked in many people around the world and around us has become also a feeding ground for latent beliefs about us versus them, and creating even more divide in the minds of people who are actually only just looking for direction and for security, but also for what I call a sense of belonging. And that's also the reason why social connection is so important. Now, how do we change things around, right? How do we make a difference and how we're dealing with this situation moving forward? I really think this really starts with a change of perspective, right? I think we need to look at the things very differently. Instead of looking beyond, I think we have to start looking more within and in between. Now, I would say also the current situation very much reflects our existence in past times. When we used to live in tribes and settlements, we naturally relied on the tribe for companionship, for food, for shelter, and also for safety. We were bonded through culture, through stories, and through norms and through rituals, and we're able to sacrifice our personal needs for the benefit of the group. Now, such a mindset, I think, is very much needed in today's times, not only to, let's say, collectively prevent the further spread of the virus, but to ensure that we come out of this even much more stronger. So what I'm going to do in these next slides is provide you some perspectives in terms of how we can do that. I think first and foremost, and so fundamental to us and what we can do so naturally, is just to stay connected, right? Stay connected to friends, families, and loved ones, or even when we're isolated at home is of utmost importance. Now, I think we really need to have these social connections to make much more sense of really what's going on, to help us feel safe, emotionally stable, and even give us a boost to our physiological properties that can help us to potentially fight off a possible infection. Technology can help us to stay in contact. Remember, technology is not a replacement for this lockdown. It's a way to facilitate our social connections. And I would also like to say, and it's something that we don't regularly do, but also be mindful of how difficult and what an impact the coronavirus and the pandemic is having on people. So maybe reaching out to people that you normally don't have contact with is just kind of a nice thing to do and a really good thing to do in today's world as well. Another important element that I think is really important in today's world is inclusion. And I think we need to actively create environments, be it physical or virtual in that perspective, where different people feel part of a community, environments which invite diversity and inclusion and help create a kind of common sense of identity for people from all walks of life to connect. This type of connection allows individual differences to flourish while staying true to common values, goals, regardless of your age, your orientation, your religion, or your race. I think inclusion is already a hot topic in organizations today, but I think it's a really important element here to help us feel safe and feel that sense of belonging. I think what we've also now seen in this pandemic is the role and the significance of culture and how important culture is. And the pandemic, the culture has shown to eat strategy for breakfast. I love to use that expression. It's everything, it's everything that binds us in that perspective. And if everything outside of us that binds us is changing, then we have to start focusing more from within to find stuff that binds us from within as well, intrinsically. Now, I think cultural values is the driving force which connects us and inspires people to find purpose and also to do things in a meaningful manner. I like to call it the invisible glue that helps to connect us in difficult times. So focusing on culture is something that I think I strongly advise during these difficult times. And the last thing also I want to mention here in terms of how we can better deal with this pandemic moving forward, in terms of also being socially connected, is that we need to find ways to find new habits. We have to find new habits and develop new skills and way in how we deal with new and upcoming situations. Working from home seems like a good thing to do, but it's really hard for us to do. We haven't all developed the right skills and the right strategies to be able to work from home more effectively or to set boundaries for ourselves. And so I think moving forward, learning to develop new ways of doing things and being able to let go of things of how we did things before is extremely important, especially in a world that's so rapidly changing. So if you want to be a good connector, then you have to sharpen your hook sometimes. And developing new habits is a way of sharpening your hook. Now, I know my time is coming to an end here, but what I want to discuss with you and kind of help you reflect on is, like, there's so much more uncertainty in front of us in the coming time. We thought 2021 was going to be that new year. It was going to bring us a fresh of optimism, and it does. But we're still seeing that a lot of things from 2020 are lingering on. So we still have to learn. We're dealing with so much uncertainty in today's world. Could there be another lockdown? Multiple lockdowns happening. In the Netherlands, currently, we're in a lockdown again and a curfew. So things have even gotten worse than in the past. But how will things further develop moving forward? Will we see further new developments and strains or mutations of the coronavirus? Will we see maybe a new global financial crash because of the pandemic that we're in and for it taking so long? Will we see people losing more jobs, or will we see a rise in technology that will help us to get out of this? I mean, there's so many questions that we don't have answers to that are also very much affecting how we make decisions moving forward. And I think the most important thing here is for us to become feeling more comfortable with all of this uncertainty. A way for us to do that, I think, by certainly, is being more connected with each other and finding a really, really strong sense of belonging. Because one thing we've learned from this pandemic so far is that being socially connected can really help us to move forward. And the power of the group, or the power of the tribe in that perspective, is something that will help us not only to get out of this much more effectively, but will help us to deal with the ongoing uncertainties of today's world and today's realities, and to help us come up with better ideas, strategy, and also innovation moving forward. So I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation today, and I hope that you are ready to harness the power of the new tribe, as I say, and allow today's session for you to help find more connections amongst the people who are here today, and to also be better prepared for the unknown.